Hello once again, it's Mr. Pete, your YouTube shop teacher. Welcome back to beautiful Studio G. And this is the long-awaited second part of my epic raft trip. And there's a model of the raft. Now, I hope you watched the first part, and I'll flash that title on the screen right now. Now, if you haven't watched that, you probably do not know what I'm talking about, so it might be helpful. But anyway, when I was about 21 or 22 years old, still a college student, my brother and I and two other guys, men, young men, students, went on a raft trip. And I gave you the introductory on that, where we left from and things like that. So now in this video, I made a model of the raft approximately, what it looked like. I'm going to tell you how I built it, and then we're going to go through the maps and so on, and talk about the journey. It's primarily a verbal account because well, my friend Dick, who was on the trip, did take some photos, but he lives in southern Illinois, and his wife is very, very sick, so I'm hesitant to even ask him if he still has those pictures, and he probably does not. So the only account of this is verbal, and in fact, this video is meant more for my own family, who I never told the story to, than what it is to you out there in YouTube land that probably have little or no interest in it. But anyway, let's begin and talk about how I built the raft. Actually, I built this model of the raft 3 months ago when I did part one, and I'm going to talk about the construction of it, where I got the materials and so on. But in the model here, believe it or not, I've had these paint sticks for over 40 years. I was saving them for just the right job, and then I was even hesitant to waste them on this job. But anyway, I finally forced myself to use them. But here's how I built the raft, and the materials were supplied by my dad and a friend. I had, I think, about $5 in the raft, and that was 5 pounds of nails. I had no money. Remember, we were in college. I was in dire poverty, but we wanted some adventure. The whole idea was mine, and of course it was inspired by Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and so on. And I had built smaller rafts when we were kids in the creeks and that on logs. It doesn't work. You got to use oil barrels. But anyway, my friend Dick, who went on the trip, worked at Foster Grant, a plastic company in town there, and he gave me 8 or maybe there was even 10 barrels. I don't remember. But they had, I don't know what they had on, some kind of chemical, but I took the bungs out and I put Permatex on them and tightened them down good so there wasn't any leaks. And they were brand new barrels. They weren't rusted through or anything like that. Also, Richard gave me a bunch of strapping that they use on pallets, you know, the common type of strapping that's used. So that's what I used for that, although I had a great deal of difficulty tensioning it, getting it tightened up. Now, where did the wood come from? Well, these cross beams, and this is not exactly, but pretty much the way that I built it, and they were big timbers, perhaps 4 by 6s or something like that. And my dad was still alive and teaching in 1965, and during that summer, and this would be August of 65, they ordered at the high school a bunch of large machines for the machine shop, and they were surplus machines, and they came on skids from Springfield. Heavy skids, so that's what the wood was. But also during that summer at LP High School, and there's a picture of that in another video of mine, they put new bleachers in the gymnasium, so my dad was able to get a bunch of these bleacher boards for me, and they still had the numbers on them for the seating, and that's why I put that on there foolishly, but just to show you what I did. But this whole thing was built in the backyard, and it was just a mock-up. That is, I maybe had some temporary nails in there to hold the thing together while I was setting it up, but I didn't drive the nails in. That was done on the shore of the Illinois River. Well, we were college students, as I said, so we had to get back to school within about a week or two, about a week after this trip. So I had quit my job, you know, getting ready to go back to school, and I built this in the backyard. And all by myself. Nobody would help me. I didn't even have the crew yet, and poor old Lyle had to do all the work, and people, my friends would come over and laugh at me like the grasshopper laughing at the ant. But once I started to get the thing to look like a raft, all of a sudden it piqued their interest and they wanted in on the action. And foolishly I let them, but who's going to take a trip like that alone? No, I needed a crew. I was the sole owner and the captain of this raft, and remember that I was, in the thumbnail of at least part one, that is not my raft, that is the Kon-Tiki, who also was a great, Thor Heyerdahl was a great inspiration to me. Now everyone with a half a brain knows that you cannot float something like this down the river and steer it. You would be at the mercy of the wind and the current. You would have no control whatsoever. But if you watch the old MGM movie, I think Mickey Rooney's in it, you know, it's Huckleberry Finn. Of course, they're using poles. They're standing on the deck and they're poling it in the Mississippi River. You know, that's crazy. Actually, they were on the MGM lot in a pond that was 2.5 feet deep. The same pond they use for Laurel and Hardy movies, you know. So that's all fake. And the only way to steer a raft, I'm getting off subject here, is you have to be going faster than the current. And the current's about 3 miles an hour. So we did mount a motor on it. So I built a transom of some type. It didn't look exactly like that. I don't remember what it looked like. But I needed a way to mount the motor, and Dick, the same, he was helpful to me. He gave me the barrels and the straps, and his dad, who was our Sunday school teacher and a wonderful man, Bud, he had a motor like that. I think it was a 9-horse or 10-horse, and he let us use it, even though we pretty much destroyed it during that trip, and more on that later on. So the motor mounted to the transom right here, and we did have, some gasoline. I think the gas tank was right on the motor. You know, it wasn't a separate tank with a hose. So we must have had a can of gasoline along. We had to have. But I don't really remember that, and we didn't want much gas because of the danger. Plus, we had a fire. I'll tell you about in a few minutes. So there was a lot of adventure that went on in this 5-day trip. And what was our destination? There was no destination. We're going as far as we can in 5 or 6 days. I'm not sure exactly which it was. Well, you're probably thinking, how did you fools take shelter from the storm? Well, we had a tent, an umbrella tent, and it was a 9 by 9, so this is approximately to scale. So the tent was fastened with staples or nails by the 4 corners, and it was an umbrella tent. And I have a picture of it because it was my dad's tent, and we bought it in 1958, and it was a J.C. Whitney, which means Sears, umbrella tent. And it looked exactly like that, just as shabby. So that's what it would have looked like, nailed down to the deck. But we didn't keep it up all the time. That was mainly for sleeping or shelter from rain or the sun, because in fact the wind would catch that like a sail and just move it whatever way the wind was moving. We had no control. I believe we had a couple canoe paddles along because I did own a canoe already, so that would help us get into shore, but really the motor had to do the work. With 4 guys and this thing weighed 500 pounds or more, you can't move it by muscle power. It had to be moved by a motor. And luckily, someone somewhere told me, Lyle, you got to have a motor. Otherwise, you cannot even get it out of the way of the barges on the river, and there's lots of barge traffic on the Illinois River. So what else did we have along? Well, I think we brought lawn chairs, and we had no changes of clothing or anything like that, but we did bring food, and we had a few tools and binoculars and things like that. We had no radios, but right back here near the motor, I mounted, and I just nailed it to the deck. It was one of those fiber drums that has a metal lid on it, and it was lined with plastic. And we would keep our items in there that we wanted to keep dry, maybe our wallets and things like that. But at some point, it got so wet that it collapsed. But we still continued to use it. Now, what do we got up here? I was going to cut out a hole as a toilet, but you know, that's pretty crazy. So, I don't want to talk about it. Wouldn't it have been neat if I could have mounted a little steam engine back there as the source of of power. And I'm going to get off a subject, and I know it's a long video, but when we went on this trip, we didn't see anybody else, you know, fishermen and maybe a few guys in small boats, but there wasn't anybody else traveling on a raft because no one does anything like this except the crazy Peterson. But let me tell you one other side story here is when the following year we took our epic boat trip down the Mississippi River, but at some point when we got into the Mississippi out of the Illinois River, we ran into another raft. And there was a little cabin built on it, and it said, "Pray for us." And in there were two teenagers, and they had come clear down the Ohio River from West Virginia on this crazy craft. And we met up with them. We were afraid of them at first. We had a gun on, but we always carried a gun, you know. Always. No matter what we did, we had a gun someplace or another. And now we would have 4 guns. One for each of us. But anyway, we would tie up along that other raft sometimes overnight, you know, and talk to these guys, and then we wouldn't see them for 2 or 3 days, and then we'd run into them again down in Baton Rouge, and you know, so that was fun. But they started out in West Virginia with a homemade paddle wheel driven by a Briggs & Stratton. Well, they didn't get 100 miles before they realized that didn't work, and they had to buy an old Evinrude and put it on there. End of that side story. And at that time, in 1965, my dad had 6 months to live. And he was not well at all. He took oxygen at night, but he was still working at the high school, as I said. He was just about ready for retirement. But he would come out of the back door of the house where I was building this to go someplace in the Plymouth. And he would just stand there with his hands on his hips, look at what I'm doing, shake his head a few times, and walk away. He didn't discourage me, but he knew that it was crazy, and I probably could not be dissuaded from my craziness. So finally, after about 2 weeks, I had this thing ready to go. Everything was marked with paint so I could reassemble it, and I borrowed a truck. I don't know whose truck it was, and it took me 2 or 3 trips down to the river, and that's in the other video, where I assembled the raft. But during the last few days, when people would come over to see me and not help me, it piqued their interest. And then finally, "Hey, can I go with you?" So I did select my crew, my brother and Bill and Dick. So it probably took the better part of the day to nail this thing together. And I think one of my friends did come down and help me do some of the nailing. But there it sat on the shore, shown in the other video. And I was afraid somebody might steal it that night because we just had to leave it. But we came back the next day, and it took all 4 of us to get that thing pushed into the water, which was kind of tricky. And it did float, but it did not have that much freeboard. That is, there was probably only 6 to 12 inches above the deck, above the water. And if all 4 of us, or even 3 of us, got on one corner, it would go into the water. And quite often the water was rough enough where it washed right across the deck, because we did encounter a couple storms and heavy seas when these barges went by. All right, finally, the raft is in the water, we're ready to go, and I think a couple people did kind of come down to see us off. I don't think my mother was there, but she was worried. She was praying. She even took it to her prayer group. But again, we did not have charts like this, but I'm going to use these charts in the video. We had an Illinois road map that by the second day got wet and we lost it, or it blew off the deck or something like that. Anyone still watching? I doubt it. Okay. So now we're on I almost called it a barge because it was. Not streamlined at all, because I would have liked pontoons, you know, that were continuous, because there was a lot of restriction between the barrels. But that's the only way I knew of building it at that time. I had minimal tools, certainly no welders or anything like that, just hammer, nails, and saw, as I recall. So now we're out on the water finally, and getting our sea legs and trying to figure out how this thing's going to work. Now, if you will indulge me, I'm going over to the big Illinois map and show you where we started, and take you right on through there and just tell you a few verbal stories along the route of highlights that I can remember. There's probably an awful lot of things that I can't remember what I had for breakfast. How can I remember what happened almost 60 years ago? All right, here's the state of Illinois. You know, I don't like it at all when I have a bright background because look at how dark my face is. You can hardly make out my features, which might be a good thing. I feel like Art Fern standing in front of this chart. Remember Art Fern? I bet you don't. Raise your hand if you do. But anyway, here we are, where the orange arrow is here in Peru, Illinois, on the south shore of the Illinois River, and we've just pushed off. And again, it's August of 1965, and away we are for some adventure. And you know, we did unusual things as young boys and young men. We weren't at the park playing Little League. We weren't shooting hoops with the other kids. We weren't playing tennis. No, we were doing crazy things, shooting guns, rockets, anything you can think of that was dangerous and fun and adventurous we were doing. We had no parental supervision, although Mom and Dad knew what we were doing, but you know, we had minds of our own and I don't think we were controllable. In fact, I'm still not controllable. So we started in Peru and we ended up in Browning, Illinois. Why in Browning? Because our time was up. Our 5 or 6 days was up, and that's as far as we could go, and we had to get back to school. I was hoping we could make it all the way to the Mississippi River, but you know, I think we made it about 2/3 of the way. But remember, 3 miles an hour, so in 5 days, that's like going 30 miles a day or so. So the first night, we ended up in Hennepin, Illinois, which is someplace down here, and no great adventure. We just tied up someplace, but we were having a lot of fun. It was very hot, so we would just jump off the raft and swim along with the raft. And the raft, we were traveling at the same speed as the raft, so there was no danger of losing it. But you know, we were still boys, so we're jumping off and diving off and just doing and having fun, trying to stay cool because it was hot, very hot. We were sunburned. Oh yeah, it wasn't too long before we were all sunburned and miserable. And remember, I'm captain, but I almost had a mutiny on me several times. Now, we had no decent food along. We just brought beans and frankfurters and things like that. And I think we had a cooler, but you know, how long will that ice last? And our whole plan was we would stop from time to time at marinas or, you know, to gas up and maybe even tie up there and go in and eat or buy gasoline or provisions or whatever we needed, because we had no way of storing anything cold or dry. Everything was wet and clammy and smelly and dirty. But now, the second day, we are approaching Peoria. This is Peoria, Illinois, a pretty good-sized city. Used to be headquarters for Caterpillar for over 100 years. Now they took it some other place because Illinois is so bad for business. But anyway, right before you get to Peoria, there's a wide spot in the river, and it's called Lake Peoria. But it's not a lake, but it's at least a mile wide. But the channel for barges is relatively narrow, so we didn't need to be in the channel because we didn't take up much water. But at that point, the sky turned dark and the wind started blowing, and we had a heck of a storm. We have no radio or anything, and we don't know what's going on. But the wind, we set the tent up to take shelter because it got cold, but the wind just drove us all the way to the far shore, where we ended up, and we tied up for the night and tried to get dried off. But it was scary because the water got so choppy with whitecaps and everything, it would come right across the deck. And to be honest with you, several times I thought we were going down. Well, we experienced quite a bit of drama going through Peoria, which was really the only big city that we ever passed through. But after our little adventure with the storm here, we continued down the river, and when we were basically in downtown Peoria, there was a bridge, Route 74, and they were just now, at that time, building the bridge because the interstate system was not complete in 1965. So this Route 74 bridge was probably 3/4 done, but not open to traffic, so we passed under that. And they weren't working that day. Maybe it was a Saturday, I don't know. But anyway, there were some teenagers up on the bridge, and they were up to no good. All of a sudden we realized they were shouting at us and throwing things at us. Now we're moving at the speed of the current, and I don't remember, I think we did start the motor up and tried to speed things up, but these items, we thought they were rocks that they were throwing at us when they hit the water, but they were big nuts and bolts, big galvanized fasteners that were being used on the bridge, and that's what they were throwing at us. And it was so scary that some of us jumped into the water and just held onto the edge of the raft where we could duck under if we had to, because a couple of those hit the deck and they darn near went through the board, and it just scared the heck out of us. We had no radio or communication. We were just at the mercy of the river and those hooligans up there who should have been shot, but they were out. My brother got the gun out, but what are you going to do? They're way, way up there. We're going to kill somebody for throwing things at us? Guess who would go to jail? Well, we did have a gun with us. Maybe I didn't say that earlier, but we carried a gun wherever we went. I think it was just Jan's Colt 380 that was our trusty little companion. And you always felt a little safer when you had a gun. And those were during good times. Right now, I guess you need an Uzi. But as we continued through Peoria, we're still not done with the drama. So we knew that there was a lock and a dam, right about here, and the water level was very low because it was late summer. And someone said, "Don't worry about that lock. They're going to lower the wickets. You can go right through." Well, we didn't know what wickets were. I think he tried to explain. I had no clue. And I bet you raise your hand if you know what wickets are. I'll explain that a little bit more later on. But essentially, it's a dam that can be raised or lowered down into the river by a crane, and then you just go right over it. Meaning that there wasn't a great differential between the high and the low, like there is at some locks that are 12 or 15 feet. It must have only been 3 or 4 feet. Anyway, they lowered the wickets, but we didn't know what that meant. I thought we were going to go over a waterfall that barges could handle, but little boats couldn't. But when we actually got there, it was just a rough spot in the water for a little while. So there was no drama, but we worried about it since we were up here. Fools that we were. So then we continued down the river. Now it gets a little hazy here because not too much happened during this time, except for one thing. Well, from time to time we'd pull the the raft up onto the shore, or we'd tie up and we would eat or maybe have a campfire or something like that. But after one of those little stops, we got back on the raft and started the engine up and put it into reverse to back off, and nothing happened. The engine roared, but no movement at all. So we turned it off, raised the motor up, no propeller. We had lost the propeller. Well, we're no fools, or were we? We had a spare prop, because Mr. Walton had both what you call a power prop and a speed prop. One was 2-blade, one was 3-blade. So we must have had a few tools along. So we went to put the other one on, but then realized that the nut was gone. Now that's a big deal, the propeller nut, which I think was like a big acorn nut. What will we do? Well, we're in the middle of nowhere. No hardware store, no marina, no Home Depot. So we just got out into the water and we drifted. I don't know how far. Maybe it was hours, maybe it was 10 minutes. I don't remember. But we saw a big grain bin, concrete grain bin right there at the edge of the river. An elevator, I guess you'd call it. But it was abandoned, totally abandoned. But we stopped there and we could see off in a field there was a machine shed, a farmer's machine shed. So we went over there with a wrench. Now my brother at that age was already an expert at identifying threads. He said that's a half 20, or it was a fine thread. And so we went into that and looked around. It was real dark in there, and eventually found a piece of machinery that had the right nut. And yeah, we stole the nut. We were thieves. We stole the nut. And we got back and it fit. But in the meantime, I went into that grain elevator, which was empty, and there was a ladder on the inside where you could climb. It was, you know, built into the concrete. Now, I'm afraid of heights. So I thought, but no problem, this is a good sturdy ladder, I'm going to go all the way to the top. I think I went up about 75 feet. I was petrified. I couldn't look down, and there was nobody to rescue me. I wanted the fire department to get me down, but I did manage to get down, but I was just scared to death. But then, anyway, we got the motor running and continued on, undaunted. So anyway, we're immature and we're doing goofy things, and it was cold one night, so we built a fire right on the deck. But I took the lid of that fiber drum, which was metal, and just laid it there, and we built a little fire right on the deck. But of course, it burned through the deck. We're thinking all the heat's going up. No, and it did, but finally we realized that we kicked the whole thing into the water. We had no fire extinguisher, but we had plenty of water. But the deck was so badly charred you couldn't walk there on it anymore. Well, the video is getting a little long here, so I got to try to speed it up. Not a whole lot happened here and it became routine, and we were to the point where, you know, we've had enough of river life. We like it in the city. We wanted some potato chips and M&Ms and a good cold Coca-Cola made with real sugar back at that time. So it's the end of the 5th day, and we camped here for the last time, and then the next morning we decided, that's it, we got to get back to school, and we stopped at the next big city, which was Browning, and I think it had about 70 residents. So as we pulled up to the shore, there was an old man, actually he was probably 55, smoking a pipe. Boy, did he have bad breath, and fishing with a cane pole. So we pulled up right next to him and started a conversation like, you know, how's the fishing? Are they biting? And I said, mister, we didn't know what to do with the raft. We're going to walk up into town. We didn't know what to do with the raft. So we considered scuttling it by shooting holes in all 8 barrels with the .380, but that would have been pretty irresponsible, don't you agree? So I asked this old man, I said, hey, mister, would you like to buy the raft? He said, what am I going to do with that? How much? I said, $25. Ah, forget that. And then I said, well, you know, you could use this as a dock, just tie it up here and fish off it. I think you'd love it. Well, I'll give you $5 for it, he said. Sold, says I, total owner and captain of the raft. So off we went into town, which wasn't very far. There's nothing there. It was a wide spot in the road, but there was a little store. And actually it was a house with a little storefront on it like they used to have years ago. And we went in there, and just a lovely little old lady greeted us, and we said, ma'am, any place to eat around here? Well, no, not really, but I'll cook you boys breakfast, she said. And she charged us, I think, 50 cents each. But right there on the table, it was a kitchen table. She had a sunbeam frying pan, and she cooked us bacon and eggs, but one at a time. And I, being the captain and being the responsible one, was the last one to eat. But boy, did that bacon smell good when she was cooking that up. And then finally I got to eat, and we were satisfied, and it's time to go home. Well, how are we going to get home? It's about 200 miles from Browning back to Peru. We're going to hitchhike? Well, this was all planned ahead of time. That Bill had a girlfriend by the name of Janice, and she was going to come down and get us. So she let us use the phone, I think charged us for long distance, 75 cents. We didn't have much money. So we called up Janice, and she said, I'll be right down. But it took about 2.5 hours for her to get there. And when she got there, she's driving this Buick Wildcat, baby blue, and it's a rag top. And she had the top up, but when she got, we started loading all of our gear into her trunk, which was cavernous, by the way. And she said, you guys smell real bad. She was a pretty girl, by the way. And she said, I'm putting the top down. So we had to drive all the way home in the wind with the top down, and got back home and unloaded, and couldn't wait to have my mom make us a nice meal and take a shower and get some clean clothes on. Well, that's really the end of this little story. If anybody's actually with me, raise your hand. and leave a comment. But now I'm not going to go into still pictures because there are none. Although I don't know if I mentioned it, that Dick in Southern Illinois might still have some photos, but if he can find them. But his wife is real sick right now, so I don't want to ask. But if you're still with me, I'm going to show you a few things in the chart book that I have in regards to where we stopped and some of the events that I just described. If you can take just a little bit more, and I'm not sure how long this video has been running, but I have a feeling it's been about 30 minutes, so please stay with me and then I'll sign out. So there we are at Browning, Illinois, and it's very near Beardstown, which is, well, not a real big city, but at least people have heard of Beardstown. No one ever heard of Browning. I wonder if it's still there. Okay, let's take a look at the charts. Remember, we had no idea there was such a thing, and our Illinois road map was wet and gone within the first day or two. But now, in retrospect, I can see where we were. You may remember this page from the earlier video, and right here is where we launched the raft on the south shore of the Illinois River, right across from the city of Peru. So that's where it all began. And you might remember in my video, Rub-a-Dub-Dub, Three Boys in a Tub, that the cesspool where we launched that little boat was in this general area here. But on that fateful morning, this is where we launched the raft and went downstream. Okay, you see here Lake Peoria. It's just a wide spot in the river. Now the white channel here is for the barges, but this is where we encountered the huge storm that night that blew us clear from the channel. And this might not be the exact page because there's about 4 pages of Lake Peoria here, but it must have been at least a half mile or maybe a mile when we were blown toward this shore and spent the night soaking wet. And here we are finally at the big city of Peoria, and the Caterpillar World headquarters were right in this area, but now, as I said, they have moved that. And this is East Peoria, and right now there's a big Bass Pro Shop someplace along here. I think right about here. Some of you may have visited that, but this is the Route 74 bridge, interstate, that they were building when we were almost assaulted. Well, we were assaulted, although not wounded, by those vandals. Those guys, they're probably in jail now. I hope they are. I hope they're still in jail because you know they were up to other mischief as well. But that was a fun trip. I'm not done. Well, a couple pages later on the charts here, that is the dam that I was talking about. And I'm going to show you what the wickets are because there's a nice little picture of the wickets that I just now noticed. I've never seen it before. So here are the wickets. And you can see the crane there because the crane is there permanently to raise or lower the wickets as needed depending upon the level of water in the river at that time. And here's the large metropolitan city of Browning, Illinois, and this is exactly where we pulled up with the raft. And I got to tell you, along the shore there were millions, perhaps even billions, of clamshells that had holes drilled into them because years and years ago they were making mother of pearl buttons there. So they drilled all these holes out of the clamshells, and then the clamshells were just thrown on the shore by the billions, as I said. And matter of fact, the old man fishing with the bad breath, he was standing on those. But I think we had to walk. Here's Browning up here. It's not right on the river, I suppose. Well, it's a swamp. Why would they have the river right on the swamp? So you had to walk up here, 1,000 foot to get into the metropolitan area of Browning and have a delicious meal. And there's the direction north where we're going to go back home. One more thing, if you can bear with me. Now I can't get this all in because it covers 2 pages, but this is the index of the maps. So starting with Chicago here, they show you all the different sections of the river. And here is where we started, at La Salle, Peru. And then continuing on the next page, you can see where we went we covered all of this and finally came to Browning there where we finished up. Well, if anyone is actually still with me, I thank you for watching this long, 35-minute long video, almost as long as the raft trip itself. If you enjoy this type of content, let me know, because I'm really debating on whether or not to make a video of my epic boat trip down the Mississippi to Florida. We were gone 6 weeks. There are slides of that, but they are horribly faded and almost not worth showing. And I really am debating on whether or not to make that video, so let me know in the description. There has to be hundreds of people asking me for that, otherwise I'm not going to bother, because I don't really think it's of much interest to most people. But thank you so much for watching my anecdotes, and I'll see you in my next video. And there's over 25 videos in the can at this time for your viewing pleasure. So long for now.